In this video, I'm going to show you how to inspect and service the 5R55s Ford transmission without putting it up on a lift, using some simple parts and a pancake compressor and an optional hand vacuum pump. The 5R55s stands for 5-speed, rear-wheel drive, 550-pound torque rating, synchronous gears. The transmission has no dipstick for checking the fluid level, as it was not required to be checked for the life of the transmission. However, when the transmission performance becomes questionable, we need to inspect the fluid. I'm going to show you how to do it, and this technique will work for any vehicle with a 5R55s transmission. To check the fluid level, we need to add fluid through the fill plug on the bottom of the transmission. Wait, fill plug on the bottom of the transmission? Seriously? So the way this has to be done according to Ford's recommendation is to warm the transmission fluid to between 80 and 120 degrees Fahrenheit, add the fluid, and then see if any comes back out. Don't worry, I'll explain this soon. Since we're not putting the car on the lift, we need a way to transfer the fluid to the transmission. I'm going to use a pancake compressor to transfer the fluid through the hose from a reservoir. This inexpensive canister I got from Walmart will work well as a reservoir. I got some clear plastic flexible vinyl tubing. The hose I'm using here is 1/2 inch vinyl. At least 6 feet long is good enough. First, drill 2 holes in the top of the cap carefully so the cap doesn't crack with a 7/16 inch drill bit. Now I'm using a slightly smaller drill bit than the outside diameter of the tubing because I want the tubing to fit airtight in the hole. So I'm wallowing out the holes a little at a time and checking the tubing for a tight fit. Once I get a tight fit, I'm done. Cut off a piece of tubing about 12 inches and push it into one of the holes carefully about 1 inch. If you didn't drill the hole too big, the tubing should make a tight seal on the cap. This tube is where I'm going to pump the air in to push the fluid out. Take the long piece and stick it in the other hole and push it all the way in to where the end of the tubing is near the bottom of the canister. It's a tight fit, so take your time. If the lid cracks, you'll need to go get another one, so be careful. Screw the lid back on the canister. The second tube should extend to the bottom of the canister. You're going to need a fitting for the fill plug on the bottom of the transmission. This one is a 1/8 inch MIP by 1/8 inch MIP brass fitting. MIP stands for male iron pipe. Now what the material the fitting is made of doesn't matter. Now you can use a different combination of parts, but the side of the fitting that fits in the transmission has to be 1/8 inch MIP. The other side could be different as long as you match the tubing size to it. I found this fitting and tube combination to work well. Make sure the canister is completely clean. We don't want to introduce anything into the transmission that's not the transmission fluid. I'm using an air compressor to blow out the canister and the tubing. The transmission fluid that's required for the 5R55s is Mercon V ATF, which ATF stands for automatic transmission fluid. We only need 1 quart unless the fluid is more than 1 quart low. I've poured 1 quart of fluid in the canister and I've got the lid closed tightly. And here you can see that the homemade reservoir is ready to go. So just to demonstrate, I'm going to apply 30 psi to the short tube, and that will force the fluid out of the long tube to the transmission. To remind myself later down the road, I decided to write on the cap, letting me know to put only clean transmission fluid in. Ford Mustangs are so low to the ground, if you do anything from underneath, you got to jack it up. Mustangs have a little notch for the jack, so place the jack plate in that notch and jack the vehicle up high enough so you can get under there to access the transmission fill plug. Always use a jack stand to support the weight of the vehicle. Never rely on the hydraulic jack. After it's high enough, slide the jack stand underneath and relieve the hydraulic pressure on the jack until the full weight is resting on the jack stand. As a backup, close the valve on the hydraulic jack and go ahead and adjust the height so that it's just touching the Mustang. Now we need a really cool and absolutely free diagnostic software called Forscan. I'll put a link to Forscan's website where you can download it, as well as read all their documentation and all the tools and materials I use here in the description. Now to use Forscan, you need a compatible ODB to USB adapter that will work. The one I'm using will be in the description. Not all OBD adapters work with Ford, so if you're using a different connector, you may run into problems with the connection. I've verified this connector works great, and you can read their documentation on their website listing recommended connectors. They even list a Bluetooth version that's compatible. This video is not a tutorial on how to use Forscan, but is only used to perform this task. If you have any questions about Forscan, leave me a comment and I'll be glad to help you as much as I can. It's time to start the procedure. I've got my air compressor on and the regulator is set at 30 psi. After connecting Forscan and the engine running, bring up the TFT PID in Forscan. This is the transmission fluid temperature parameter ID reading in real time, and wait for the temperature to rise to 80 degrees. Don't remove the fill plug until the temperature is at least 80 degrees. Doing so before the temp rises to 80 could cause the fluid to flow out of the fill plug when we're removing it. The internal hydraulic fluid pump needs to pump the fluid to all parts of the transmission. Only remove the plug when the temperature reaches 80 degrees and make sure to complete this procedure before it reaches 120 degrees. The larger hexagonal plug is the drain plug, while the smaller plug in the center is the fill/inspection plug. Now the transmission fluid temperature has reached 80 degrees. Make sure you set the parking brake and press the brake pedal firmly because it's time to cycle the gears through all positions. So while holding the brake pedal, cycle the gear from reverse, neutral, drive, third, second, first, and then back to park. This will make sure all the transmission is filled to all the passageways in the transmission. Now it's time to remove the inspection/fill plug from the transmission oil pan. Using a wrench, hold the drain plug to keep it from loosening up while using a torch bit to remove the fill plug. When the plug comes out, there's a little bit of fluid in the standpipe that comes out, so don't worry about this. Now screw in the 1/8 inch MIP fitting and tighten it with a 7/16 inch wrench. Now the Mustang needs to be on a level surface to actually check the fluid, so I need to remove the jacks and lower it to the floor. I'll look to see if there's a steady stream of fluid coming out. If there is, I don't need to add any fluid. If nothing comes out, I'll need to add some fluid. As I can see, there's not a steady stream of fluid, so I'll need to add some. So I'm raising the vehicle back up so I can put the tube on the fitting. Checking the fluid temperature, it's at 94 degrees, so I'm still good to go as long as it doesn't go above 120 degrees. Now it's time to transfer some fluid into the transmission. Go ahead and lower the Mustang down to the floor, and using a blowgun, pressurize the canister with 30 psi to pump 1/4 fluid into the transmission. Now that I'm done transferring the fluid into the transmission, I'm going to use a vacuum pump to suck out the excess fluid back out into the canister. Now that I'm done draining out the excess fluid, time to jack the Mustang back up to remove the hose. One thing to note, the vacuum pump is still hooked up to the hose and has created an airlock. We'll see why that becomes a messy factor in a minute. So I've got the car jacked back up, time to remove the hose, then I lowered it back to the ground because we want the fluid level to be at the top of the standpipe. I realized I should have drained more fluid out as the mess leaks out onto the floor. Just a tip, use some kind of container to catch the fluid so you don't have a mess like I did. You don't really need a vacuum pump to do this. You could just use a container to catch the excess fluid as it drains back out. So nothing is draining out now, so the transmission is full, and now I can raise the vehicle one last time to remove the fitting and reinstall the plug.
As you can see, I'm still just at 104 degrees, so it never went over. Well, this is what my fluid looks like that came back out. It's pretty daggone dark. Very, very dark. Here is the new fluid right here. This is the old fluid that came out. As you can see, it's a little bit darker, but it definitely looks dark in here.
Make sure you don't turn the engine off until the fill plug is reinstalled, or else the fluid will drain out of the transmission and you'll need to restart the whole process again. Hey, if y'all found this video useful and would like to help me out, subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. I appreciate it. God bless, and I'll see y'all on the next one.